we know that the way Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong and their senior team have handled Australia in the wake of the terror attack across the other side of the world in the Middle East 6 months ago has only fanned the flames of anti-Semitism here. Instead of showing leadership after the October 7 attacks and making sure there was social cohesion in our country, making sure the conflict a world away didn't play out on Australian streets, they have only made it worse. Every day with their rhetoric, they are putting Australian lives, Australian Jewish lives here at risk. Well, we know that Peter Dutton and the Coalition have a very different approach, but I wanted to know what it would be like, how Peter Dutton would handle this crisis if he wins the next election. So I sat down with him today. He could be the next PM. What would he do about this crisis we're seeing on our streets? Here's that interview. Peter Dutton, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Shari. Thank you.
If you were Prime Minister, what would you do to try and solve this anti-Semitism crisis that we have in Australia?
I think there are two things that we can do immediately. One is that the police chiefs would understand very clearly that my government would have zero tolerance for anti-Semitic conduct in our country. It would send a very clear message to others that the conduct would not be tolerated and that people would be arrested and prosecuted through the courts according to the rule of law. Secondly, we need to mandate the teaching of the Holocaust story and lessons, because I think they're being lost on this generation. I think we need to mandate that every school child should visit a Holocaust museum, again, to understand one of the most significant parts of world history, that 6 million Jews were gassed, tortured, lost their lives, and that they should have no tolerance in their own lives, in their own communities, amongst their own friendship and social groups for anti-Semitic comment. And I think that would go some way to changing the debate. As I said in my speech last night, I think the Prime Minister missed his opportunity, as John Howard grasped in 1996 with the tragedy of the Port Arthur disaster, where it was a moment of national significance. John Howard spoke out against it. He stood up for our country and he changed the course of history. I think through Anthony Albanese's weakness and his decision not to speak up against the actions that we saw on October 9, I think that has allowed a level of anti-Semitism in our country to flourish, and as a result, people are living with fear at the moment, and that pains me, and we need to bring it to an end and allow all Australians, regardless of their faith or beliefs, to live a free life in the best country in the world.
Do you think Labor seems to be capitalising on this war in the Middle East, and in doing so is actually causing ancient hatreds to emerge in Australia?
Well, the short answer is yes, and I don't think there's any dispute about that. The Labor Party has a particular internal dynamic where they've got the left and the right split on the issue, predominantly supporting a position against Israel, and I think that's been evident from day one. I think the Prime Minister missed a massive opportunity to show leadership when we saw the protests at the Sydney Opera House. He abrogated that responsibility, and I think it's allowed a level of anti-Semitism to take place. It's obviously risen very quickly, but I think there is a message that was sent from the Prime Minister, whether he meant to or not, that there is a level of acceptance of some protests that included anti-Semitism. And now we've got what I think is a government that's trying to play to a particular segment of the population by taking a stance in relation to Israel at the moment, which is acrimonious. It's against our national interests, and I think the most appalling part of their stance is that it is for crass political purposes, and they're sacrificing our national interest and the interests of Australians of Jewish heritage as a result.
And potentially risking national security even here. I mean, we know from Mike Burgess that there is a possible terror level, but you never hear the government speak about these threats.
No, because I just don't think it's front of mind for them. I don't think they have the relationships with the intelligence community. They've excluded the intelligence chiefs from the National Security Committee, which I sat on the National Security Committee for 6 years, and I can tell you there are many discussions in relation to defence that ASIO could contribute to, that the Australian Federal Police could comment about in relation to a migration matter, in relation to a people smuggling matter. Something from defence would be contributed, and they've excluded all of that. And I don't understand why, because the threat, as you rightly point out, hasn't gone away. And as we see the temperature escalating in the Middle East, if Iran takes action against Israel, if there is a broader conflict within Europe, then that has the potential to play out here domestically. And as we know, shamefully, schools in our country at the moment within the Jewish community have guards outside because they're worried about attacks on preschoolers and children. It's how you could not take national security seriously at this point in time is beyond me.
You know, risking children's lives and instead prioritising politics and winning some votes from the Greens. Do you think the Albanese government should be worrying more about issues like youth crime in Queensland and Alice Springs before they try and lecture Israel about how to defeat the terrorists in the Middle East?
Well, I think Alice Springs is a particular case study of this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister spent more time at the tennis than he did in Alice Springs. There are people in Alice Springs who are treated as second-class citizens. They're the people who own the stores, who own the homes that have been broken into, who are the owners of the motor vehicles that have been stolen, wrecked or put on fire. And yes, I think you should get your own house in order before you start lecturing others. And I think when we look at the youth crime issue, we've had a bill on the table now. We've said that we want to work with the government in a bipartisan way to demand that Meta and the other companies take down that content which glorifies or justifies some of these crimes where cars are being stolen. They're doing it so that they can post the video because that gives them kudos with their friends. Starve them of that opportunity and take away the motivation or the interest that they've got in stealing the car in the first place.
They're very quick to take down misinformation when it related to The Voice, though.
Of course.
Now, the Prime Minister this morning said that there could be a Hamas-free Gaza. Just a short time later, we then heard the leading Palestinian delegate in Canberra say that Hamas was very much a part of the future of Gaza. It was a philosophy, it's entwined in the population. Do you think the Prime Minister and Penny Wong are naive in their thinking?
No, I don't, because I think they've cobbled together a policy which, as we said before, is all about trying to win votes from the Greens, and it's about trying to hold inner city seats, and they're putting that objective ahead of the national interests. And so I think that's what is at play here. If Penny Wong was making a serious contribution to the debate and had a serious proposition to put in relation to statehood for the Palestinian territory, surely she would have spoken with members of the community here to understand their thinking and to bounce off them her idea. But it's clear that none of that happened because, as you point out, the representative here in Australia is at complete odds with where Penny Wong claims to be. I think they're still, frankly, living their university campus lives, and it's time for them to grow up because Penny Wong has made a catastrophic mistake which I think has harmed our international reputation and certainly significantly damaged our relationship with Israel.
Last night in your speech you spoke about how we do have anti-Vilification laws, we do have anti-harassment, anti-incitement laws, both federally and at state levels, and yet we haven't seen any leaders actually use them. There have been virtually no arrests in the past 6 months since October 7. What do you think is going on here? Why is there this reluctance from law enforcement to actually use the laws that are available to them?
I suspect the upper echelons of the police service, particularly in New South Wales and in Victoria, are taking what they believe is to be the lead from their police minister, from their Prime Minister, and that's the problem that we've got. Now, if an action is brought and a matter goes before the court and there is a finding of guilt, it's appealed, say all the way to the High Court, and it's found to be unconstitutional or there's a problem with the law, then the law can be amended at that point. Whilst ever we allow these people to get away with the doxing, with the threatening behaviour, with the boycotting, and with the general anti-Semitic behaviour otherwise, it will continue and it will flourish. And if we don't have a zero tolerance, then I just think it's a green light, and for the Prime Minister to abrogate his basic responsibility to people of Jewish faith, but in turn, and as a result of that abrogation to all Australians, I think he fails his first duty.
We've seen 3 boats arrive on our shores since November. In the past, there have been boats that have come, but they've been intercepted at sea. That doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. Are you concerned that under Labor we could start to see an influx?
Well, I'm very concerned because I think if Labor allows this problem to flourish again, they're going to find it very hard to get it back under control. They have abandoned Operation Sovereign Borders. The Prime Minister talks about Operation Sovereign Borders as if it's the same policy that it was under the coalition. It's not. And what the people smugglers take from the change and the watering down to Operation Sovereign Borders under Labor is that there's a green light for them and there's a business opportunity again. As we know, at every Labor Party conference, he's argued against Operation Sovereign Borders and against tough border protection policies. And I think the people smugglers can see that on this front that he's probably not telling the truth as well.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of industry groups speak out and complain about the fact that they're being made to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, just to have a look at government policy. When it came down to Tanya Plibersek's nature positive plan, people couldn't even bring their mobile phones into the room to have a look at this detail. Do you think this is quite absurd secrecy from a government, and is it designed to shut down public criticism?
There's no doubt it's designed to shut down criticism, it's designed to divide and conquer. The Teals were elected on a platform of transparency and openness and would support this government in a minority government at the next election, but don't say anything about the way in which the government's conducting themselves now. I've never seen anything like it, where you've got religious leaders who are dealing with the government, negotiating with the government at the moment on the religious discrimination bill. The Archbishop or the Imam or the Rabbi is required to sign a non-disclosure agreement, can't go back to their church or synagogue and speak to their advisors about what it is that they've read or seen. Some of them are seeing part of the bill, others are seeing the entire bill. Some people, it seems, have a hotline to the Prime Minister, but not others. And there's nothing commercial in confidence that is being discussed here. There's nothing of national security importance that's being discussed here. And it's not a market-sensitive position or a national security position that would otherwise warrant that. So I think it's plain and simple a technique that's been drafted by Mark Dreyfus to try and stop public scrutiny and criticism of where the government is at. It's the case in relation to the nature positive bill, as it is in relation to a couple of other areas where the government's negotiating at the moment. And it's a lack of transparency because the government's got bad policies, which frankly, again, are all targeted at trying to please those Green voters as opposed to what's in the best interests of our country.
Yeah. Right, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks,
Peter.
Thank you. Pleasure.